It used to be that you could talk openly about how to secure elections, keep them safe. Nowadays, the left wants to criminalize that conversation. Why is that? Why are they so bent on criminalizing concern for our election system? My next guest has written a book on the subject, and he's had a very close proximity to it as well. Former Congressman Jody Hice from Georgia is now a senior vice president at the Family Research Council. He's got a new book. It's called Sacred Trust, Election Integrity, and the Will of the People. Congressman, great to have you with us. Thank you so much, sir.
It's an honor to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Tell me, why did you set out to write this book? What does it include?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, I did not go to Congress with the issue of election integrity on my radar at all. But while I was there, I ended up being one of the senior members on the Oversight Committee. And quite frankly, right after COVID, in fact, we had our first case of COVID in Washington State. And the very next week after that confirmed case, the Democrats had a hearing in the Oversight Committee where they started the process of calling for election changes and for a federal takeover of elections of sorts. And, they started to say, we're going to have an epidemic. We need to send ballots to the people because they're not going to be able to go to the ballot boxes, or they're going to be fearful or whatever. And Vince, at that point, it became eerie to me, really, because it was week after week after week after week. We started having these hearings where they were calling for election changes, and the rest of us were wondering what's going on with COVID. Is this going to be a pandemic or what?
Yeah.
Then they added a layer that voter suppression was additionally a problem, and they used Georgia as Exhibit A. And I'm from Georgia, and I knew the allegations were false. So
yeah. Biden said you guys made Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle.
Yeah, it was Jim Crow 2.0 So I kind of got pushed into all this, and this became a major issue for me in my latter half of last two terms of my time in Congress.
Well, that's for sure. Yeah, and Georgia's kind of an interesting battleground on all of this because obviously a lot of questions about election integrity down in Georgia spurred on by the Biden administration in no small part in all of the ways they suggested that there's voter suppression going on in that state just by virtue of passing an election integrity law. And then when subsequent elections have taken place, it turns out black turnout's actually gone up and people have more confidence in the elections. So Biden and the left were lying about elections in Georgia, weren't they?
Yeah, it just was not true at all, and that's why I started in that period of time of pushing back with it, because I'm pretty familiar with Georgia law when it comes to voting. We had never had any problems. Unfortunately, Stacey Abrams came forward at that time. She started repeating the mantra, the narrative of voter suppression and all that sort of stuff. But when all was said and done, Georgia did not have the issues that it was said to have had, and even since that time, they've passed some even stronger election integrity laws, and as have, for that matter, dozens of other states. But this whole issue of election integrity is an absolute essential that we cannot get wrong in this country. And it is indeed a sacred trust that we must protect.
And it's something that the left was aware of, at least 20 years ago. Your fellow Georgian, former President Jimmy Carter, was a part of an election commission called the Carter-Baker Commission in 2005, and they looked at elections and how we increase confidence in them. And one of the many great conclusions was, hey, paper ballots, hey, photo ID, make sure people are voting on election day. These were like normal people's conclusions that even Jimmy Carter, who's still with us, by the way, concluded back then. Why did the left change so much? How come they abandoned all of that?
Yeah, that is a great point. At that Blue Ribbon Commission, they actually used the word fraud is a wide open door with mail-in ballots. And, that's not a term that Republicans came up with at all. It's something that the Carter-Baker Commission came up with. And, yes, so much of these issues, COVID became a springboard for pushing and embracing so many election laws that never would have even been considered before COVID. They're so outlandish, and the mail-in ballots being one of them.
Yeah.
All of these things used to be, not too long ago, broadly accepted on both sides of the aisle.
And
COVID became an excuse.
yeah, it became an excuse, and it wasn't just new laws. There was straight up ignoring of the law going on. Places like Pennsylvania, where they were making it up as they went along, and they said, well, because of COVID, we can change the rules. My understanding of this, Congressman, is that just having a pandemic doesn't mean that the rule of law disappears, does it?
No, and that actually I addressed that in part of the book. One of the the Constitution says that time, place, and manners of elections are reserved to the states. So these are state issues. As a result, every state handles their elections a little bit differently. But what happened with COVID is you had governors and secretary of states and some of these other individuals unilaterally make decisions under emergency provisions where they totally bypass the legislatures of the various states and, in essence, enacted law in and of themselves. And, I don't know. It seems to me that is the only way that these massive changes in our election laws across the country could have been done so rapidly, because many legislatures were already out of session, all that sort of stuff. But nonetheless, we had massive changes that took place. And as a result, we all know there were truckloads of complaints and problems in the elections from coast to coast.
Yeah, I mean, some of these states are just ludicrous, though, with the laws they have on the books. California is a good example of a place where they've legalized ballot harvesting. They allow third-party political operatives to handle and deliver ballots at will, which is a place that's very ripe and, of course, has been exploited a lot by corrupt, especially lefties in the United States. But every so often, a Republican will commit some sort of voter fraud, too. And for that reason, we need good laws and good trust in our elections. Do you ever get the sense,
Absolutely.
Do you ever get the sense, Congressman, that Congress should step in, though, and say, okay, no nonsense in all of these states? I mean, you're right that it's primarily the state's role in the Constitution to establish these laws, but Congress can play a role if they want to. Can we say, hey, no more election month, maybe just election day?
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be a role for Congress on the federal level to establish some broad parameters such as that, to make sure we have an election day, for example, that the Constitution grants. There's certain things, but it would be, in my opinion, a dangerous precedent for a federal takeover of elections. At that point, whatever party is in control could have unprecedented advantage. It is best left to the states, but I do think there could potentially be a significant, legitimate role to establish some broad boundaries. For example, what should be done to keep election roll registration files accurate as possible.
Yeah, that seems to be a federal role, because now you have multiple states with the same person listed, and they don't even live in that state anymore.
Exactly. Things like that. States should have photo identification. I mean, we need to know that you are who you say you are before you vote, and that you are a legally registered voter in this precinct or whatever. So there are some basic parameters I think that Congress could establish, but by and large, it needs to be left to the states.
We have seen some progress on election integrity in a variety of states across the country. Over half the states across the country have now banned what we refer to as Zuckerbucks or Zuckbucks, where you have rich people who come in and pay for the election systems designed just to whip Democrat turnout only, as Mark Zuckerberg did in the 2020 election. That's been banned now by, I believe 27 states, or at least restricted. Additionally, places like Texas and Georgia have passed voter integrity laws that have improved their election systems. Are you encouraged, Congressman Jody Hice, with the direction all of this is headed, or do you feel like a lot more needs to be done?
Yes and no to all the above. There are certain states that have taken very good, positive strides forward. That's good. On the other hand, there are many states that have not. They're lagging behind, and they're still, you mentioned California, for example. They still have ballot harvesting. They've got all sorts of potential problems that they have now legalized in that state. And to think that those laws will not be problematic, I think, is nothing other than wishful thinking at best, or it may be intentional. Who knows? But some states have made good progress. Some states have not made much progress, if any, and there's still more to be done. This is one of those issues, though, that I think requires diligence. election cycle after election cycle, there will always be some attempt at shenanigans somewhere. There probably always has been, probably always will be. And that will demand that we always are tweaking our laws and making them better to secure elections. But at the end of the day, Vince, and I'll just say this, elections are not about who wins or who loses. Elections at the end of the day is whether or not it was an accurate display of the will of the people. Was their voice heard? That is part of the consent of the governed, part of the will of the people to be self-determining with our government and the policies that we're going to live under. So elections are the voice of the people. That is what's the final driving force, and that is the reason why we've got to protect this. If we lose the voice of the people, we're in massive
We're done
trouble.
for.
Yeah. So this is a critical issue for sure.
And one of the reasons people become suspicious, and watching all these presidential elections now, when election night is going on and the returns are coming in, some states have their act together. They can get the numbers out pretty quickly after the polls close because they've done the legwork of counting all of the absentee ballots, and they've prepared all of that. And Florida is apparently the gold standard, it looks like.
Great example.
And they come out with that right away. And then you get states that drag on for weeks, days, weeks before they finally get results to you. I mean, how much does that need to change, Congressman, in terms of restoring faith in our elections and making people think they actually have a say in who's our leader?
Yeah, that is one of those areas, again, that I addressed it really needs to be changed. It gives every appearance, whether it's happening or not, it certainly gives the appearance that one side or the other is just counting to see how many votes they need, and they're going to keep counting until they win, and listen, there needs to be election day. After election day, it's over. I mean, if you didn't get your vote in before election day, it's over. Perhaps some exceptions with military or individuals such as that have no other option. But by and large, the election is over at close of polls on election day. It should be. This concept of continuing on and on for days and weeks on end counting votes is so problematic. And at bare minimum, it breaks the confidence of that a fair election is taking place.
Congressman Jody Hice, former congressman from Georgia, now at the Family Research Council as well. New book called Sacred Trust, Election Integrity and the Will of the People, where he examines all of these issues in detail. Congressman, thank you very much for your focus on this issue and your time today. Really appreciate that.